Today, so many tiny city cars cost the kind of money you might expect would buy you a larger Super Mini. Here's one that doesn't: Suzuki Celerio. It's not only the most affordable model of its kind, but also the cleanest, the most economical, and the most spacious. As a result, this might just be the car that gives its Japanese manufacturer an important foothold in a segment that's traditionally been dominated by the European brands. There are funkier alternatives, no question, but are there fundamentally better ones? That's what we're here to find out.
There are very few brands who know more about small cars than Suzuki. Manufacturers who merely dabble in this sector usually produce trendy products prioritising style over substance. Those who specialise in little runabouts, though, tend to deliver models like this one, Suzuki Celerio. You can see at a glance from the practical shape that a more sensible approach has been taken here, with the same kind of thinking prioritised when it comes to questions of price, power and equipment. Whether that will be enough in this country to attract more buyers from the mainstream makers is another question, but globally, this car has certainly been doing its part in making Suzuki an increasing force to be reckoned with. In India, for example, the brand takes over 40% of the entire market, while in Japan, the company dominates the so-called K car sector for models that are less than 3.4 metres long, with engines under 660cc in size. This isn't a K car, of course. In the West, we like our city-sized models to be a bit bigger than that. We like them a bit pokier too. So the Celerio adopts the same kind of 1-litre 3-cylinder petrol engine format used by many of its rivals. The engineering highlight here being a 998cc dual-jet unit that delivers close to 80 miles per gallon and under 85 grams per kilometre of CO2. Of equal interest for potential buyers will be the news that the boot is class-leadingly big. There's a strong standard of safety and prices will significantly undercut most major rivals. It should all sound very promising if you're one of those with a sensible approach to city car ownership. Time to put this Suzuki to the test. Cars that are cheap and light are sometimes fun to drive. Mostly though, they're just dull. Set off in a Celerio and you know within 200 metres which of the two outcomes you're going to get here. For a start, there's a wonderfully slick gear change and an eager little 1-litre 3-cylinder engine that spins happily up to 6,000 revs and pulls 60 miles an hour in second gear. You get a well-judged suspension setup too, the ride quality firm but never overly harsh. This is one of the main reasons why the car feels so good through the corners, with plenty of traction and body roll kept well in check, despite the boxy 1.53 metre height. To be frank, it's unlikely that typical customers will want to throw this car about, but anyone who does want to do that will find this Suzuki responding willingly, up to a point. Some of this perkiness is down to the lightness I mentioned. This car is the weight of a fully sized adult, less hefty than a rival Volkswagen Up, for example, and you feel the difference on the road. Less impressive are things like the overlight clutch and the lack of much meaningful feedback through the steering wheel. Were it not for these things, we'd be likening this model's road-going repertoire to that of dynamically class-leading small Fords like the KA and the Fiesta. To be fair, that light steering is a boon in town, where it facilitates a very tight 9.4 metre turning circle. This, of course, makes parking simple too, aided by the commanding driving position and the great all-round visibility. I mentioned the fact that power comes in 3-cylinder 1-litre petrol form. In fact, this recipe can be ordered in 2 versions. I'm trying the standard model here, but this engine can also be ordered in cleaner and more frugal dual-jet guise. Go for the dual-jet unit and the efficiency gains are significant, but since the 68 PS power output is the same as it is in an ordinary Celerio, the performance you can expect is the same. Don't get your hopes up here though. Remember, there's no turbocharger to boost performance, the kind of thing that you'd find in much pricier rivals like Renault's Twingo TCE90, a Fiat Panda Twin Air, or a Nissan Micra 1.2 DIGS. Instead, this Suzuki gets a much simpler, normally aspirated unit that hums you happily to 62 miles an hour in 14 seconds on the way to 96 miles an hour. And to be honest, that's probably about as fast as you want to go in a car of this kind. I should mention perhaps that those performance stats apply only to variants with manual transmission. There is also an automatic option, although you can't have it with the dual jet engine or lower levels of specification. A kind of automatic option anyway. To be absolutely accurate, the transmission in question is a computer-controlled automated manual gearbox rather than a full-blown torque converter automatic. The downside of that is that this so-called AGS or auto gear shift system will feel a little slow-witted if you're used to a normal auto. On the plus side though, buyers get the benefits of an auto transmission setup that uses no more fuel and is no dirtier than the manual variant. Inevitably it is slower though, the 0 to 62 miles an hour sprint time lengthened out to a leisurely 16.5 seconds. Venture further afield and an AGS specified Celerio will feel more in its comfort zone, though as with the manual models you'll no doubt feel that a few extra braked horses wouldn't go amiss if you're accelerating up an entry slip road. Settle back into a cruise and it's not the quietest car of its kind, but the 3-cylinder thrum isn't unpleasant and it's still possible to use the Bluetooth phone connectivity that most models supply and still have a reasonable conversation up at the legal limit. Are you fed up with funky small cars? Suzuki is. The Japanese maker acknowledges that there is a place for fashion-led little urban runabouts, models like the Toyota Aygo or the Smart 4.4. You sense, though, that it can't quite see the point of them. In contrast, Suzuki's city cars have always been sensible, and this Celerio replaced two of the most practical models in the company's back catalogue, the affordable Alto and the slightly smarter Splash. It combines the virtues of those designs too, with the boxy, budget convenience of the Alto and the smart, modern look of the Splash. The modern bit is epitomised by the front end and the way this twin chrome-barred grille flows upwards into these wing-shaped headlamps. Simplicity of form also rules in profile. Upper and lower crease lines attempt to give the sides some shape, but otherwise there's little attempt at either style or sportiness, and crucially no sloped back rear roofline, which is perhaps the main reason why this car is so spacious inside. So much so, in fact, that Suzuki insists on calling it an A+ segment model, a reference to the fact that though it's a city car, you know, like a Peugeot 108 or a Volkswagen Up, it offers passenger and luggage space to rival a Super Mini, you know, like a Peugeot 208 or a Volkswagen Polo. The luggage space part of this car's buying equation is explained by a very simple but very effective piece of design here at the back. This has nothing to do with anything you can see, like for example the chunky bumper and the V-shape made by the tapering tailgate, and everything to do with the stuff that you can't, namely the torsion beam suspension housed beneath the floor here. It's been configured with what Suzuki calls flattened ends that create this very low base for the cargo area. As a result, you get a near class-leadingly practical 254 litres of space in here. That's a fraction more than a Volkswagen Up or a Hyundai i10 and a full 25 to 30% more than you get in cars like Toyota's Aygo or Peugeot's 108. Rather embarrassingly for Suzuki, this cargo area is also 43 litres larger than the one you'd find in the brand's supposedly bigger Swift Super Mini. Even larger Super Minis don't offer much more luggage space than this. A Volkswagen Polo, for example, would give you only 26 litres more, despite being more than a foot longer. Push forward the standard split folding rear bench and the 726 litre total is far less noteworthy, which is slightly surprising given the boxy shape. The revealed loading area is nothing like flat either. Plus, you've to bear in mind that the lowered boot floor removes any possibility of being able to specify a proper spare wheel. Instead, you'll have to get by in an emergency with this tyre mobility kit, which theoretically at least will keep you mobile enough to limp to the nearest tyre fitter in the event of a puncture. These caveats aside though, we're looking overall here at an impressively practical showing. And practical is a word that springs readily to mind on taking a seat here at the front. Those graduating on from a Spartan little Suzuki Alto might find it to be an upgrade, but just about everyone else will see little but strong durability in the firm utilitarian plastics. To be fair, a few efforts have been made to brighten things a little, with silver trim framing the centre console and the air vents. There's also a bit more around the red-needled speedo dial that's front and centre in the clearly presented instrument binnacle that you view through the three-spoke wheel. Unfortunately, the wheel isn't reach adjustable, nor is it properly multifunctional. These buttons are only for the Bluetooth phone connection. Still, it does move for height, as does the six-way adjustable seat. And it helps that the basic driving position is quite high and commanding, giving good visibility out of the glassy cabin. Otherwise, there's little of note, and nothing like the kind of central infotainment touchscreen that some rivals now offer. Still, the centre console stereo is smartly presented and easy to use, as are the chunky and intuitive ventilation controls that sit just below. Further down, most models offer a USB socket and all provide a handy space to leave your phone while charging. There's a couple of cup holders too, but other storage space though is pretty limited, and these door bins are so narrow that you'd struggle to fit more than a magazine or a road map in them. Taking a seat in the rear can sometimes be a bit of a contorted process in a city car, but here is aided by wide opening doors that you can pull out by as much as 90 degrees. Once inside, the rear bench is, as advertised, pretty much as spacious as you'd expect to find in a Super Mini from the next class up. Importantly too, it offers 3 sets of belts in a class where nearly every other rival provides only 2. Journalists can sniff at how cramped middle adults might be on this seat, but the whole point here is that for most buyers, the usefulness of having that extra belt will be in the option it offers to carry an extra third child. For me, as a family man, that feature alone would go a very long way towards selling me this car. If you were taking adult passengers, then one of the things that they might notice is the fact that there's more headroom here than you might expect a contender in this class to be able to provide. Another benefit of a boxy shape that sees this Suzuki sit nearly 10 centimetres taller than rivals like Peugeot's 108 and Volkswagen's Up. In fact, there's reasonable space in every direction, or at any rate, as much space as any 3.6 metre long car is ever going to give you. Legroom is certainly quite acceptable by class standards, even with a 6-footer sitting in front of you. And there's plenty of room width-ways too, despite there being only 1.6 metres of cabin width, which makes this car narrower than many of its rivals. The Celerio may not be quite as cheap as its predecessor, the Alto, but it's a much more sophisticated thing and remains the most affordable city car choice that you can make in this segment. Prices start at just £7,000 for the entry-level SZ2 model, but most will want to find the extra £1,000 to stretch up to the mid-range air-conditioned SZ3 level. With this spec, there's also the option of paying another £500 for the cleaner and more economical dual-jet version of this car's 1-litre 3-cylinder engine. Stretch to it if you can. The top SZ4 derivative needs a £9,000 budget and was launched with the older 1-litre power plant, but does offer the £800 option of AGS automatic transmission. As you'll gather from what I've just said, the value proposition here is very strong indeed. These days, only the Renault-owned Romanian Dacia brand can sell you a car that's cheaper than an entry-level Celerio. The model in question, the base version of Dacia's Sandero, is priced from £6,000 in its least expensive guise. It's worth pointing out, though, that Sandero is a larger, super mini-sized car powered by an old-tech 1.2-litre petrol engine that's 30% dirtier and thirstier than even the older version of the 1-litre unit that this Celerio uses. This means that those buyers choosing the Dacia will have to find lots more money for fuel and for tax. On top of that, unlike the base version of this Suzuki, a base Sandero makes you wind up your own windows, does without the safety factor of curtain airbags, and doesn't even have a radio. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is that if you apply a realistic buying mindset to the purchase of a new car, then buying a Celerio is effectively the least expensive way of getting your name onto a registration document. This car certainly looks very good value indeed once you start to compare it to equivalent 5-door versions of city car segment rivals. The least expensive alternatives are Korean-built, Vauxhall's Viva and Kia's Picanto, and in their cheapest guises cost around £1,200 more than the entry-level version of this Suzuki. In both cases, though, you get a boot 50 litres smaller than this Celerio's. For comparable luggage space, then you need to find around £1,700 more than Suzuki is asking here and get yourself base versions of city cars like Skoda's Citigo, Seat's Mi and Hyundai's i10, all of which, you should point out, cost more to fuel and to tax. Stretch your budget up to just over £9,000 and your choice will widen to include some of the models the car magazines will tell you to buy. Contenders like Volkswagen's Up and Toyota's Aygo. It's easy to recommend cars when you're not spending your own money, isn't it? These are certainly very well designed city cars, but whether they're worth 30% more than a Celerio is quite another question, and one that'll be even harder for a Toyota dealer to answer, given that an Aygo's boot is 30% smaller than this Celerio's. Other alternatives priced similarly in the £9,000 to £9,500 bracket include base versions of the Fiat Panda and the Nissan Micra, but their ancient 1.2-litre engines will mean much higher running costs. A more intriguing choice for similar money is Renault's rear-engine Twingo, but again you've got the issue of a smaller boot and higher running costs than you get with this Suzuki. More competitive in both areas is Mitsubishi's Mirage in 1-litre guise, but its stripped-out spec won't look tempting alongside the fully loaded Celerio SZ4 model that you can have for the same money. Beyond that, it really depends on how much you want to pay. The least expensive 5-door versions of Citroën C1 and Peugeot's 108 are priced from around £10,000 and suffer from the same tiny boot that you get in the Toyota Aygo. But even they manage to undercut the most expensive option in this segment, Smart's totally trendy 4.4, a car priced more than £4,500 above this Celerio in its least expensive form. Fashion clearly costs. If, having considered all of this, you conclude that it is a Celerio that you really need, then you're going to want to know just how generous Suzuki has been with the standard spec. And the answer is that a lot of key stuff comes included. You get a DAB radio, for example, which, at the time of this model's launch, was an almost unknown feature to find on a car selling for this kind of money. The stereo system also plays CDs, which is something that you can't do on the fancy infotainment systems that some rivals offer. Every variant of this model also includes electric front windows, central locking, a height-adjustable driver's seat and a split-folding rear bench, all features that the very cheapest versions of some city car rivals make you pay extra for. Given this Celerio's cheapness, we're guessing that most buyers will have enough left in their budgets to find the extra £1,000 that Suzuki asks for this car in mid-spec SZ3 guise. As I mentioned earlier, that extra premium gets you air conditioning, plus for the extra cash, Suzuki will also throw in 14-inch alloy wheels, a remote locking key fob, a USB point and Bluetooth phone connectivity. Find the extra money for the desirable dual-jet engine option that I mentioned at the beginning, and you also get daytime running lights and a hill hold control system that stops you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. Is it worth stretching even further and getting this car in the top, fully loaded SZ4 spec that I'm trying here? We'd say not, but from launch this was the trim level that you had to have to get the option of AGS automatic transmission. SZ4 spec Celerios come with front fog lights, rear electric windows, body-coloured door mirrors, chrome accents on the front grille, and a stereo with 4 speakers rather than only 2. On to extra cost features. If you must look at adding trendy touches, then a lowered front spoiler and a side skirt can be added, along with metallic paint. Then there's a style pack that gives you a roof spoiler and a smarter set of Mars alloy wheels, or a rugged pack that gives you side mouldings and rather incongruous plastic wheel arch extensions. But is there really any point in all of that? After all, as I've been saying, the Celerio isn't really that sort of small car. Instead, we'd be looking at the practical stuff. The City Pack, for example, that gives you carpet mats and rear parking sensors, or the Protection Pack that gives you protection mouldings for the front corners and the sides of the car, plus mud flaps and a rear cargo tray. Maybe also the rear bumper protector sheet, the boot area cargo side net and a rear seat protective cover. We also like the foldable luggage bag and thermo cooler bags that you can get for the boot. Plus you can also specify a roof rack, bike and snowboard carriers and even a Pioneer sat-nav system. What you don't have to pay extra for is strong safety provision. All Celerio models come not only with twin front and side airbags, but also with the twin curtain airbags that the cheapest versions of some rivals make you do without. Most competitors also omit to include 3 rear seatbelts. Again, you get them here. Plus, across the range, Suzuki includes tyre pressure monitoring and Isofix child seat fastenings, as well as ESP stability control and, of course, anti-lock brakes with a brake assist function to help in emergency stops. You won't be expecting a 1-litre 3-cylinder petrol-powered city car like the Celerio to cost you very much to run, especially given that the model weighs in at under 850 kilos, whichever guise you choose. Sure enough, it's very efficient indeed. Even if you don't go for the clean and frugal dual-jet version that we'd recommend, you still get less than 100 grams per kilometre of CO2 and more than 65 miles per gallon on the combined cycle. Efficiency benchmarks that most city car rivals still shamefully fail to hit. To be specific, a standard 1-litre model like the Celerio SZ4 variant I'm trying here manages 65.7 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 99 grams per kilometre of CO2. Order this car with AGS automatic transmissions and those returns aren't affected at all. No, not a jot. It's the dual-jet version of this car that really delivers though when it comes to low running costs. This version of the 3-cylinder 1-litre gets a higher compression ratio, a dual injection system, various low friction technologies and a whole range of technical tweaks. Plus, most importantly, an EAS, engine auto start-stop system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, either stuck in traffic or when you're waiting at the lights. As a result, this Celerio's fuel and CO2 returns really are class-leading. 78.5 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 84 grams per kilometre of CO2. I think some perspective is needed here. To put it another way, the figures I've just quoted mean that a Celerio 1-litre dual jet will take you 10 miles or more further on every gallon and put out around 20 grams per kilometre less of CO2 than the kind of Peugeot 108 or Volkswagen Up model that could easily cost you £1,500 more to buy. And that is if you compare against a reasonably efficient competitor. Stack a Celerio dual jet up against entry-level 1.2-litre versions of rivals like Fiat's Panda, Nissan's Micra or Dacia's Sandero, and you'll find their Suzuki taking you 30 to 40 miles further on each gallon and putting out 30 to 40 grams per kilometre less CO2. We're talking about a massive difference in running costs. At current prices, a Celerio 1-litre dual jet doing about 8,000 miles a year, a fairly typical figure for a car in this segment, is going to set you back about £500 a year in petrol. That's nearly 50% less than some of the rivals I've just mentioned. Enough said. You won't have to pay much in the way of tax either. All versions of the Celerio qualify for free road tax, while the dual jet version keeps company car benefit in kind tax down to just 13%. That means a standard rate taxpayer would have to fork out just £220 a year. It's true that it will cost you a little more to insure this car. All Celerios are slightly unfairly rated quite highly at Group 7E, which is difficult to understand because maintenance costs are actually quite low, both for servicing and parts. The warranty is the usual unremarkable 3-year, 60,000 mile affair. Residual values aren't bad by class standards, with Glass's guide reckoning that this car will still be worth around 39% of what you originally paid for it after the usual 3-year, 60,000 mile ownership period. It's rather refreshing to come across such an honest and straightforward little vehicle. Having started this test speculating on whether it could compete with supposedly more sophisticated city car rivals, we've ended up wondering whether, in fact, it actually needs to. A Celerio is, after all, different from other little urban runabouts in so many ways. It's less fashion conscious, so it's bigger inside. It's also better equipped and safer than many of its rivals, and crucially, much cheaper to buy. Go for the dual jet version and you also get yourself the cleanest and the most economical car in the class. All these are sensible virtues that won't mean much to you if you're looking for a trendier town car. For these people, a Celerio simply won't suit. If, though, you don't mind the boxy looks, the leisurely performance, the basic wipe-clean plastics and the overridingly sensible focus on just providing the most effective, best value city car it's possible to create, then there's very little here not to like. It's fun to drive, frugal to own and spacious to live with. There's even a bit of character here, if you care to seek it out. As a result, unless you really are a fashionista in this segment, this Suzuki needs to be high on your shopping list. Try one, and then stack it up against pricier rivals. And one thing's for sure, there'll be no need for the hard sell.